Well, good morning, everyone. Hopefully you had a great day yesterday. I was flying all day, so I didn't get to experience that. But it is great to be back. I have had the luxury of traveling throughout the world and speaking, and I've been able to speak in Munich multiple times. A little tidbit about myself also is my father was actually born and raised just south of here in a very small farming town of Merklingen. So I have a little bit of roots from Germany going back. So it's always great to come back. And I hear there's something starting tomorrow. I don't know. I don't know. It's something about beer. I don't know. That's what I heard. But what I want to do is I want to talk about authentication protocols. And I actually want to start with something that really isn't authentication protocols, but I don't know if you saw this or not, but this is the result of the MGM attack. This is a casino in Las Vegas, and those are slot machines. Supposedly, this attack was a basic, "Hi, I'm Joe, can you give me credentials?" Sure, no problem. Took less than 10 minutes. And look at the result. People were locked out of their rooms. People can't get reservations. This is day 5 that the MGM Corporation is down. So when we start talking about basic things like authentication protocols, right? It's very important. The basics are important. And what I see is that organizations aren't taking care of the basics. So that's what we're going to focus on today. We're going to focus on the basics and exactly how you need to secure your environments. It was about 5 years ago when there were rumors that on-prem Active Directory was going to be gone soon. I think we all can agree now it's not going anywhere. 2 years ago, I spoke at RSA. I had 600 people in the room wanting to hear about Active Directory security. Active Directory security is extremely important. So we're going to focus not only on on-prem AD, we're also going to focus on Azure AD, or as it's now named, Intra ID, and talk a little bit about where you can go to make settings, look for some things that might trip you up when you make these settings, because there are some details that we have to be concerned about. So let's first of all talk about on-prem Active Directory. On-prem Active Directory has 4 authentication protocols. They're still there. They're still very active. Even though some of them are quite old, this is what we have to deal with. We have LAN Manager, NTLM, NTLM v2, and of course, Kerberos. Now, LAN Manager is the oldest of the group, right? Does anyone have any idea what operating system LAN Manager was first introduced with? Windows 3.11. Windows for Workgroups. Okay? Anyone running Windows for Workgroups? Anyone? Okay. Now, if you have the installation files or the disks, they may be worth something, right? I don't know if you have the Antique Roadshow here in Germany, but we do in the US. It would be worth something. But these are the protocols that we have to deal with. Now, to secure them, we have to understand what each of them are capable of and which ones we can get rid of. Kerberos is the top. Kerberos is supposedly the most secure, right? We're going to talk about how it's not secure. But Kerberos, you cannot get rid of it, right? It is integral inside of Active Directory. It is a requirement that you have Kerberos. Now, NTLM v2 is also required. These are the 2 authentication protocols that default in initial communications. So when something starts to communicate, it's going to start with the most secure and work its way down, okay? Kerberos and NTLM v2 are what we need. Interestingly enough, and I challenge you to test it and also think about this in your environment, Kerberos is used when a normal user authenticates, right? Control-Alt-Delete, put in their credentials. Kerberos is used to authenticate. When I access resources, right? Let's say I go to a server 1, and I access a file on server 1. I'm going to be using Kerberos most of the time, depending on the application. But do you know that when you use an IP address, you don't use Kerberos? I want you to think about that with all of the things that are going on in your networks, all of the applications that you produced, all of the commands that are automatically running, all of the logon scripts, all of the other things, scheduled tasks that are running. If an IP address is used to connect, Kerberos isn't needed. Kerberos isn't used because you don't go to DNS. Okay? So you're immediately using NTLM v2, not using Kerberos. So these types of details become very important when you start thinking about what are we doing and how are we going to secure the environments. Now, as we move down through the chain, NTLM created an NT3, right? And then, of course, LAN Manager created an NT311. LAN Manager has some very distinct limitations. It's also very hackable, very crackable, right? It's the easiest thing to crack, right? One of the limitations is it has a 14-character requirement. Even if you put in a 6-character password, it's going to pad that password with 8 additional characters to make a 14-character password. It takes that 14-character password and breaks it into 2 7-character parts and takes one of the 7-character parts and encrypts it, and then uses the encryption of that to encrypt the second. So really you end up with an all uppercase 7-character password. That's why LAN Manager is so bad. It is very insecure. So what we want to do is we want to try to eliminate it if possible. We really want to try to kill LAN Manager and NTLM. Has anyone in here successfully removed the use of LAN Manager and NTLM from your environment? I have one hand. How long did it take you? Half of a year, okay? I think that's actually a short amount of time. That's very good, half a year. Because you have so many applications, so many things that are relying on LAN Manager and NTLM. Now, Microsoft has given us some ways that we can eliminate it. Here's one of those settings, right? So if I jump into the operating system here, and I'll show you where this setting is in group policy. So if I come down here to a GPO, I go to my policies, I go to my Windows settings, security settings. We come here to local policies, which is really poorly named. And then I go to my security options. And then down here, I have my LAN Manager Authentication, which should be possibly right here. Okay. Now, you will see that there are actually 6 options. But these 6 options are very difficult to actually understand what they do by looking at what is written in the configuration. The first 4 really have nothing to do with the server at all. So when you see it says LM and NTLM responses only, or somehow modifying it, that's from the client side. It's only when you get to the bottom 2 options does it even entertain limiting LAN Manager and NTLM from an authentication protocol. This is where you can refuse LAN Manager, refuse LAN Manager and NTLM. It's only these bottom 2 options. So it's very important to understand the details inside of some of these, which is why I have these details for you. And I can get you the slides, no problem. Okay? But only one of you has eliminated LAN Manager and NTLM. And I do not encourage you to go and say, oh, I know where that setting is now. Let's just go for that level 6 and see what happens. The phone will ring. I guarantee it. The phone will ring. Someone is not able to gain access to something. But we need to move into this area of securing our environments, and we really need to get to this 4 and 5. Now, the reason I call it 4 and 5 is because it actually starts with 0. There are 6 settings. 0 is the first setting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? So the most secure setting here is 5. Now, when you try to investigate, and I'm going to challenge you to do this, when you try to investigate what setting you have, this also becomes somewhat difficult because you really don't know what you have unless you dive into the details, okay? So let's work through a couple of things. This top bar up here is actually the result of looking at what the computer says it's configured for. Now, in order to do this, I'm going to run a tool called SecPol. So I'm going to come over here to my domain controller, and we're going to run SecPol. I love this tool, right? If you don't know anything about SecPol, I highly recommend you start playing around with it. It's built into the operating system. It is this security policy for that computer. It tells you what that computer has configured. So when I run SecPol, and I come down here to my local policies, my security options, and down here is my LAN manager authentication level, it says it's not defined. So what I did in this other screenshot down here is I went into the registry where this is configured, and you will notice that LLM compatibility level is not even in the registry as configured. This is some changes from Microsoft. Back 10 years ago, it was there by default. You could absolutely see it. It was actually defined by default. What Microsoft is doing now is they're actually baking it into the operating system at a certain level. And the level that's configured is 3. That's the default level. So it's very difficult to know exactly what you have. Unless you go into group policy, you make the setting, and then the setting is pushed out to your domain controllers. That way you know exactly if the domain controller is supporting LAN Manager and NTLM as an authentication protocol. Because by default it is supporting it, but you really can't see it even from the information that I'm showing you here, which is a standard domain controller, okay? This is a 2019 domain controller, freshly installed. Nothing really has been configured on it, but it's pretty difficult to see the details of what's going on. Now, Microsoft also added some additional controls around LAN Manager, and they are also in those security settings. And you can go in and you can restrict NTLM. You can set it to actual configure to where it's going to block certain communications. You can also set it up to audit, and so it's going to show up in a log, and that way you can see exactly what would have happened if you would enable that control over NTLM. But NTLM is certainly something that has a lot of unfortunate vulnerabilities surrounding it. So if you come into a monster list of things that are related to NTLM, this is just nothing more than a vulnerability management solution. And I typed NTLM, you can see there's quite a few vulnerabilities related to NTLM. So this is not something that is old legacy. We don't have to worry about it anymore. The most recent NTLM attack and new vulnerability was only about 2.5 years ago. So they are constantly coming up with new ways to break into NTLM, and we have to be aware of that so that we can secure that. Okay? Now, to kill NTLM, I just showed you some settings that were in group policy to do that. I also showed you the additional settings where you can control NTLM a little bit more granularly. But there's an easier way. Just use a password greater than 14 characters. LAN Manager cannot survive in a world with a 15-character password because the maximum is 14 characters. And it will not function anymore. Now, why is this important? This is important because when you start to eliminate LAN Manager as much as possible, you're going to find out that the reason you cannot eliminate LAN Manager is due to a service or an application. And that service or application has a service account. Well, it's just that service account that needs to support LAN Manager. So what you could do is not configure group policy. You could just have all of the employees use a 15-character password, and that one account uses a 14-character password or less. Now, how difficult is it to use a 15-character password? I don't think it's that difficult at all, right? Passphrases. Use a sentence. And let's be honest, German sentences can be pretty long. I've yet to get a handle on the whole German language thing. It's got me. That's a tough one, right? But we can use sentences, phrases that's going to easily get us beyond that 14 character. They're easier to type. They're easier to remember. All of those inherent benefits of using passphrases, okay? Now, this is brand new, hot off the presses. I actually pulled this off of a September 13th, which I believe was Wednesday, post. Windows 11 just added a new group policy setting. And what it's going to do is eliminate the NTLM hash inside of communications using SMB to connect to folder shares. Okay? Obviously, up to this point, and still if you don't enable it, when I connect to a resource, the password hash is going to be coming along for the ride, which is where we get all of the relay attacks. We can get past the hash attacks. All of these things can occur from this. So what Microsoft did is they added into Windows 11 a new control that allows you to basically set this up, and it's located at this location, okay? And it looks like this. It's this top setting here, block NTLM. And you will notice it says Windows 11 and Windows Server 2022. Now, I don't know how familiar you are with group policy, but most likely Microsoft is not going to put this in Windows Server 2022 group policy. So if you have a Server 2022 machine, you go in and it doesn't have the setting like this, you're going to have to add the administrative templates from a Windows 11 box. And that's how you get these settings to show up. Okay? But this is a brand new setting allowing you now from a client, notice it's LAN Manager Workstation, this is a client-side configuration, which is basically going to deny that the communication include NTLM hashes. So even now, Microsoft fully understands that the support of LAN Manager and NTLM is probably something we shouldn't have, but we need it for legacy compatibility. And so they continually add additional controls to secure LAN Manager and NTLM. Okay? Now, with regard to protocols, there are two specific configurations around Kerberos which we have to be concerned about. Okay? If anything out of this session, this is what I'm going to encourage you to do when you get back to the office. You must know your risk with regard to vulnerabilities. They're really not vulnerabilities. They're configurations around Kerberos. Now, I'm pretty specific when I use certain terms, and vulnerabilities in my definition have a CVE related to them. Okay? These do not have a CVE. There's no patch you can apply to fix these Kerberos issues. Almost every organization has one or both of these configurations which can be exploited. I've seen a lot of Active Directory environments. I have never seen a secure Active Directory environment ever. Ever. So when something like MGM comes up, it's like, yeah, okay, they were hit, but how long ago were they hit, right? I saw a write-up that someone was postulating that Caesars 9 months ago was breached, and they paid $15 million in ransom. And they were throwing out the possibility that the employee that was working at Caesars was now working at MGM. Right? I don't know. I mean, it makes sense to me. So these are things that we have to be concerned about. But I encourage you to go look at these settings. The first one we're going to look at is Kerberos delegations. Okay, you can have Kerberos delegations for users, and you can have Kerberos delegations for computers. Most of the time you have them for computers because the computer is running a service, and the service requires that the computer has certain Kerberos delegations set up. Now, when we go and look at delegations, again, we'll hop back into our configuration here. We'll go over to Active Directory, and let's look at some computers here. So let's look at this server 2015. Here's the delegation tab, and you will notice it's not disabled, meaning it's actually configured with some level of Kerberos delegation. This level is called unconstrained Kerberos delegation. Right? It is the weakest of all delegations. This allows this computer to basically talk to other computers on the network with very little security, right? So I could increase the levels, right? So notice here that I could increase the level of security to use Kerberos only or any authentication protocol. Now, when you go to the internet, you're relying on the information being told to be correct, okay? I don't want to burst your bubble. Just because it's on the internet doesn't mean it's true. I know that kind of shocking to some of you, right? But if you were to go and ask, right, ChatGPT, how do I secure Kerberos delegation? The answer is going to be constrain it. That's going to be the answer. That is absolutely 100% incorrect, because the setting below what is set here is constrained, but it's really no more secure than unconstrained delegations, okay? There's actually a setting for Kerberos delegations which isn't even on the list. You have to configure it using PowerShell, resource-based constrainment, and it's only configurable with PowerShell. This is very difficult to actually see and pull out of your systems, right? So I have a PowerShell command here, which basically tells me if I have unconstrained Kerberos delegations. And it says that yes, the machine that I'm looking at, server 2015, has unconstrained delegations. This is the task that I ask you to do, okay? If you actually email me, I'll send you a full list of PowerShell commands, and it will not only have unconstrained, it will have constrained with protocol transition, it'll have constrained with Kerberos, it'll have all of the settings. You simply run it, and it will tell you which computers on your network can be exploited with this type of attack. It's really that simple. But you have to know about it. If you don't know about computers or users that can be exploited, you can be exploited like MGM for 9 months and not even know that you were exploited. You have to know the risk. You have to know the configurations, okay? Now, the second setting that I want to talk about with regard to Kerberos is related to service principal names. Service principal names, service related to services, right? So services, as we said, have service accounts. Those service accounts need SPNs. The SPNs allow that service account to perform certain duties for the service. But it can be exploited, right? Part of the inherent nature of Kerberos and a user that has an SPN, if you request to get information from that service account, it just freely gives up information. That information can then be taken offline and can be cracked, and now they can impersonate that service account. There's a lot of things that I just said in there which are extremely important to be aware of. One, you have to know every single account that has an SPN configured for it, because it could be exploited. Two, you have to track and monitor the behavior of service accounts in your environment. All of them. Now, normally when I ask, Have you documented, right? That's a cuss word in IT, right? Have you documented all of your service accounts and where they're supposed to log on? I mean, I was supposed to do that, right? Yes, you were supposed to do that, right? Do that, please. Because now what you can do is you can monitor where those accounts are logging in, successfully or unsuccessfully, to track if someone has actually obtained or trying to obtain information about the service account. Now, one of my favorite settings with regard to service accounts, let's come here to Active Directory. Let's just go to any user. Let's go to Maximus here. Here under account, you have log on to. This is by far one of the most powerful configurations in all of Active Directory for users. Why? Because any user can log on anywhere in Active Directory where they have the user right to log on locally. Anywhere. For years, auditors have asked me, how do I control where users can log in? Well, there's only one setting, right? And that's right here, because I can configure which computers that account can log into. But isn't that what a service account does? Doesn't it just need to log on to the machine where the service is installed? So this actually does two things. It does the documentation for you. Now you know exactly where those machines log into because they're listed here. And you're limiting the entire enterprise down to one or two machines where that account can log into. And if you get in your SOC that account tried to log into any other machine, guess what? You're under attack. You're 100% under attack. It's almost like a honeypot, but it's really a security setting. So it has three phenomenal capabilities, right? Now, how are we going to get a list of all the users that have SPNs? Well, we're going to go back to PowerShell for that. So I'm going to get users with SPNs, and here's my list. You'll notice that I have Maximus, and I have this KRB TGT thing. How important is that thing? Somewhat important, right? And that is our Kerberos ticketing agent. What I hear most of the time when people go and learn about this is they're like, well, mine's disabled. Should I enable it? No, they're all disabled according to the GUI, but tell me it's functioning, right? The one thing you need to do with this account, reset the passwords. Okay? Microsoft, as of about a year and a half ago, finally came out with documentation that said you should reset the password for the Kerberos ticketing agent once every 2 years. Seemed a little ridiculous, right? Once every 2 years. So now it's down to once every 6 months, according to Microsoft. Okay? And when you reset this password, you have to reset it twice in a row because it caches the last one. Yay, Microsoft, right? Okay. So if you want to know about that, right, somewhere I have right here, right, the Kerberos ticketing agent, and it tells you when the last time the password was set. Password last set was in March. I'm due. Okay? Don't be shocked when you go to your environment and that year is like 2005. Don't be shocked. Or it might be 2001 or 2002. Because this really wasn't an issue until DC Shadow and DC Sync attacks came around, right? And people were attacking this particular account, right? Okay. So back to our users with SPNs. So I have Maximus here, right? Maximus is associated with the SQL Server. Can I get rid of the SQL Server? Most likely not, okay? So that means that Maximus has to have this SPN. This is why I'm saying I've never seen a secure environment. Now, the thing about SPNs isn't the SPN that's a problem. It is does Maximus have a privilege? Because one of the ways that we protect users with SPNs is to actually remove all privileges from that account. Now, if I go to Maximus and I go to the member of, well, Maximus is a domain admin, immediately this is a red flag. Major, major, major red flag. But again, the application or service that Maximus is supporting that requires an SPN may be so poorly designed, it says Maximus has to be a domain admin. So what do? Well, you go in and you make sure that the password is long and strong, right? And what is the most important characteristic of a password to make it secure? Length. Length. It's not complexity. It is length. Length is the most important thing. Now, make it long and complex, good, but make sure it's long. Monitor these accounts for where they're logging in. Go and set up the logon to. All of these things become extremely important. But you have to know your risk. You have to know which accounts are susceptible to an attack. Okay? All right, let's move to Intra ID. Intra ID has a whole different slew of authentication protocols. But it's really not the authentication protocol itself that becomes the issue. It's controlling authentication protocols and what is allowed or what isn't allowed. So when we move into Intra ID, Microsoft gives us this option to set security defaults. Now, I don't know why Microsoft couldn't learn from their mistakes of 20 years of on-prem AD, but they haven't at all. It's like they look at Intra ID as if it's this new, amazing abyss of technology that we're learning about every day. We could have learned from our past, but we haven't. Microsoft has not, okay? By default, Azure AD did not have security defaults enabled, which basically was the Wild West, okay? And there was no security really baked into security defaults. Now, what do security defaults do? Well, security defaults require all users to register for MFA. That sounds pretty good, right? Requires all admins to use MFA. Well, that's a good thing too, right? Users to use MFA when necessary, protects privileged accounts, and it blocks legacy authentication protocols. All of these are great things, okay? And if you get an instance of Azure or Intra after October 22, 2019, security defaults are enabled, all right? Now, this whole idea with security defaults comes into play with conditional access policies, okay? And we're going to talk about that interaction because this is the thing that I'm going to really try to get your attention with, okay? Now, with security defaults, this should shock no one, right? Security defaults allow Microsoft to determine when a user is going to be pushed with MFA or not, right? There's no hard and fast rule. It's in the background, and Microsoft is making that decision on when a user is prompted to use multi-factor authentication. And it's just unknown, right? I don't even think Microsoft knows. I don't know what the rule set is or what the equation is, but when you allow this, you're allowing Microsoft to basically make that decision. And it also blocks legacy authentication protocols. The full list is here. Okay? Now, Microsoft says, don't just go in and block authentication protocols. What you need to do is make sure you're not using them. And in order to do that, just use the logs. Wow. Really? The gentleman that got rid of Land Manager, that took 6 months, can you imagine how long this is going to take inside of Azure AD to figure out if applications and users are using legacy authentication protocols? It's going to take forever. But if you want to learn more, here's the hyperlink to go learn about it, right? This is insane. This is absolutely insane what Microsoft is recommending. But it gets complicated really quick because Microsoft says use security defaults as a default, but really what they want you to use are conditional access policies. And I'm going to encourage you to use them too. Very powerful, awesome. It gives you the ability to carve out exactly which users, which computers, which applications, what happens with them all. But the problem is, you got to go configure them all for every scenario. And you either get security defaults or you start with conditional access policies. And it's not like you can go into Intra and go, give me the starter kit for conditional access policies. You start with nothing. Now, there are some templates, there are some things to help you, but you just don't all of a sudden have conditional access policies, right? And it forces you, as you see here, you have one or the other. You cannot have a world with both, right? But when you start thinking about the defaults and you start thinking about that list of everything that I showed you, users have to enroll in MFA, admins have to use MFA. You block legacy protocols. Let's say that you have no conditional access policies and you have security defaults. As soon as you have one conditional access policy, all those benefits of security defaults go away. All of them. Meaning legacy protocols are now all of a sudden allowed. Admins don't require MFA. So you have to go configure all of that manually. So security defaults are great. However, with one, let's say you're messing around. I'm going to go and create a conditional access policy and test it out. So let's just make it real simple. You destroyed all the security in your Azure AD tenant. All of it's gone. Because you have one or the other. And that's it. So please be concerned about this. You have to create all of your conditional access policies to mimic what you needed with the security defaults immediately as soon as you have conditional access policies. So those are some things about on-prem AD. Those are some tips on intra-ID. I have time for a question or two. Or have I permanently scared everyone?
Okay, here's a question. Yeah, you probably have.
Yeah. Sorry, I do that.
Thank you. So basically, we already established the fact that have disabled LM and anti-LM so far. And all the sources I'm reading is actually, they say, oh, anti-LM v2 is also like a legacy protocol that should be disabled in the near future. What's your take on that?
I think it's going to be almost impossible. First of all, you're the only one in the room that disabled LAN Manager and NTLM, so congratulations there. But to get rid of NTLM v2, again, you need NTLM v2 if you use an IP address. I mean, it just won't communicate, right? So I don't think it's possible. I did also read getting rid of NTLM v2 is a good thing, but I think what Microsoft is really saying is, let's just wipe out your domain controllers. How about we do that? Because that's what they want to do. They do not want on-prem AD anymore. They don't want to receive a call about it. They don't want to support anything on-prem. They want you to have subscriptions inside of Azure.
Any more questions? You're here throughout the day?
I am.
Okay, cool. So
awesome.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much.